Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, yesterday gave an interview or speech or something, I forget what it was, frankly, where he talked about the fact that now, with the advances of the Russian army, there is a land bridge connecting the Russian Federation to Crimea. And he emphasized the fact that now the rail system and the highway system are perfectly functional and perfectly protected from any kind of artillery fire or attack by the Ukrainian armed forces. Now, this actually matters quite a bit because it means that now the Russians can ship men and materiel right up to Kherson without any trouble whatsoever. And as the Battle of the Donbass is winding down, because we all see that it's sunsetting, we see its end, now clearly Russia is going to start turning its attention to the southwestern Ukraine, to the area of Odessa, Transnistria, Nikolaev. And so a lot of people have been speculating. My friend Alex Christoforou over at the Duran has said this, that he thinks that now the Russians are going to launch phase 3. I don't know if it's going to be called phase 3, but this is the next step, the next obvious step. If the first step was making it clear that the Russians were serious about using military force in Ukraine, phase 1, yeah, that worked during March. It was very clear. They threw the dice. If phase 2 was really grinding down the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donbass, well, that objective clearly has been achieved or is in the process of being achieved. Now, so the next step, you want to call it phase 3? Sure. I don't know what the Russians themselves are going to call it, but that's not really important. What's important is that, see, now that they do have this land bridge, Alex is absolutely right. This is the next stage. And it seems to me that up until this point, the Russians have been sort of like neglecting the Kherson front. There was a haphazard Zelensky regime offensive in Kherson that went absolutely nowhere and cost the lives of several hundred very brave Ukrainian soldiers. And the tragedy, once again, was an offensive for no reason that even if it had been successful, would have meant nothing because it wouldn't have, given any kind of real strategic advantage to the Zelensky regime. So these bastards threw away the lives of those brave Ukrainian soldiers for nothing. For nothing. Okay, let me like calm down and let's just look at this rationally. From the Russian point of view, what they want is Odessa, very badly. Because Odessa, for the Russians, is a very important city for all kinds of historical, cultural, religious reasons. It's a city that they want, and they're going to get it. How they get it is the issue. Now, the Ukrainians have acquired anti-ship missiles from the West, Harpoon missiles, I believe, that they have in Odessa. They've mined Odessa and that area. Basically, they are all prepared for a big amphibious assault that the Russians are going to go whole hog in like some sort of big frontal battle. But looking at the map, and I'm sorry, I can't post a map here, you're just going to have to look it up for yourself, but looking at a map from Kherson, it's very obvious that what they want to do, the Russians want to do, is go up to Nikolaev and take Nikolaev, and perhaps Zaporozhye while they're at it, right? But then what they really want to do is swing west to the north of Odessa and link up with the peacekeeping troops that the Russians have in Transnistria. Transnistria, as you know, is that very small sliver of land where the Russians have, I think, a couple of thousand troops there that are acting as peacekeepers. They've had them there for years now. And there is a very large weapons depot, ammunitions depot, actually, I think. But I don't think that that's really strategically that important. What's important is that, see, Transnistria is on the eastern side of the river there, and the name of the river slips my mind, but Transnistria is this like little sliver, and it's like the perfect stopping point. And so what seems reasonable is that the Russians would implement their deep battle plan and go in hard on Nikolaev and go around it and keep on going until they link up with Transnistria. And that way, looking at it from your point of view, I mean, here's eastern Ukraine, here's southern Ukraine, and here's Crimea. Here's southern Ukraine, And over here, roughly, is Odessa, and here is Transnistria. Well, the Russians would want to go around Odessa up until Transnistria and enclose Odessa, and then just wait them out. See, if they go for a frontal assault on Odessa, either from the north or from the sea, a whole bunch of people are going to die. Russians and Ukrainians. And the city of Odessa, it's going to suffer horribly. Why would you want that? Time is on your side. The Russians now have a clear supply line from Russia over here through southern Ukraine all the way to Kherson. They don't need to attack Odessa, to conquer it, to assault it. They don't need to. They can just wait. And it makes the most sense, especially if you have time on your side and you know for a fact that your enemy can never be reinforced. Because, of course, if the Russians cut off Odessa from the north, and in the south, well, the Ukrainian naval forces have ceased to exist, and it's just basically now a Russian lake, the Black Sea, that is, then you don't have any worries. You don't have to assault Odessa. You could just wait them out for a few weeks, perhaps a few months even. I mean, what's better? To wait out Odessa and just have them completely cut off until they finally surrender without people dying needlessly, or out of impatience, go in there strong, and you're going to have to go real strong, and, street by street fighting, pointless deaths on both sides, not to mention the civilians there and all the rest of it. Why would you bother doing that? It's much, much smarter to cut them off and just wait them out. I think that that would be the sensible approach. And the Russians, they have a lot of flaws, but they're not stupid. They're not stupid at all, and they're patient. And time is on their side. And the time for the Zelensky regime, well, that ran out quite some time ago, It's over for the Zelensky regime. So I think that the sensible thing for the Russians, and I think the thing that they are going to do, is they are going to hit Mykolaiv hard. And just hard as they possibly can to just overrun it. And then keep on marching all the way Transnistria. And once they hit Transnistria, sit tight. Organize the swath of land north of Odessa that they have captured, expand on it, push forward farther north. I mean, if this is eastern Ukraine, southern Ukraine, Crimea, Odessa, they have the swath over Odessa. What they want to do is reinforce this swath and move a little bit north. Yeah, that's the smart move. And the Russians, like I said, they're not stupid. And their priority ultimately is to not destroy Ukraine, or at least the pieces of it that they're going to take, because they are going to take it. Their priority is to capture these pieces as intact as possible. And that includes Odessa. And so that's why I do not think that there is going to be an assault on Odessa. The great Ukrainian blame game is about to begin. I'm sorry. It's just so damn funny, all of these people, these liars, these insane warmongers. They see that their little scheme in Ukraine is going tits up, and so now they're scrambling to blame somebody else. And you can see it in the little clues. Like I said yesterday, if you're a Washingtonologist, as I am a self-proclaimed Washingtonologist. I study all the little clues that tell us what's really going on in the regime. Yeah, well, what's going on is that, a day or two ago, the New York Times posted an article saying that the American intelligence services had no idea what was going on in Ukraine, and so far as military strategy and all the rest of it. They were just like, we have no clue whatsoever, which is a complete and utter bald-faced lie. Because a lot of people have said, Sotavose and some other people on the fringes who have confirmation, who have ins with the people of the narrative, as we should call them. Well, the story is basically that ever since this war started, it's been wire-guided from Washington. Yeah. the overall strategy and the operational factor, the operational strategy of this war has been carried out essentially from the Pentagon. Yeah, absolutely. Somebody in Brussels, is basically the liaise. The Brussels, the NATO headquarters, of course, is the liaise with the Ukrainian armed forces. But the whole thing has been run out of Washington via Brussels. The Ukrainians haven't had really full control of their own army. They haven't. That's pretty much of a fact, okay? Now, at this time, you could say, oh, that's only rumor. Oh, that's not really confirmed. Sources. But we all know better, okay? The catastrophic defense of the Donbass, which has played right into what the Russians were up to, which is the destruction of the Ukrainian armed forces. That's their stated objective. And the whole stand and fight strategy, which was ideated by Washington and implemented by Brussels and carried out by the poor soldiers of the Ukrainian armed forces, well, it's leading to this defeat. And so now everybody's trying to figure out whom to blame. The great Ukrainian blame game. What is going on right now politically? Well, the Biden administration has realized that the whole thing is tits up, and they're going to have to find somebody to blame. And of course, as typical in all administrations where they have a losing war, they point to the intelligence community, and they say it's an intelligence failure, that the intelligence community didn't really give the political leadership the actual information, and that's why it's all the intelligence community. And this New York Times article is, of course, getting ahead of that narrative, because it was obviously leaked by intelligence people in Washington and put it there. And there are going to be more of these little stories saying that the intelligence agencies, they didn't know nothing, And the idea is going to be to blame the Ukrainian armed forces. And the intelligence agencies, pretty soon, in a day or two more, they're going to start saying that, oh, we gave them all the intelligence, satellites, and all kinds of stuff, and we had these AWACS planes flying around and telling them what to do. And they didn't follow our intelligence, so we're not at fault. They're at fault. They're the ones fighting the war and fucking it up. And so, of course, the Ukrainian armed forces aren't going to stand still for that. And they're going to say, no, it's not us. We wanted to pull out of Severodonetsk or wherever else they're going to be encircled. And it was Zelensky. Zelensky did it. And Zelensky is going to be like, no, it's not my fault. I did what you guys told me to do. It's not my fault. And there's going to be this silent agreement between all of these despicable people. And they're going to blame Zelensky. Now, poor bastard, but I feel no sympathy for him. He's a thief. He's a liar. He's a murderer. He is. He's a guy who claims to be a Democrat who outlaws every opposition political party in Ukraine. Yeah, he's a piece of shit as far as I'm concerned, but he's going to be the sacrificial lamb. You wait now. In the next few days and weeks, as the catastrophe in the Donbass becomes readily apparent, you're going to start to see more and more stories saying how Zelensky is not such a saint. It's not Saint Zelensky, no, because they'll start talking about the fact that he has a $500 million fortune, that he has these mansions in Italy and Miami and wherever else. They're going to start talking about how he's surrounded by neo-Nazis. They're going to be talking about the shit that people like me and the other people in the commentariat have been talking about for months. Okay? The Washington Post and the New York Times are all of a sudden going to discover this new information about Zelensky that they had no idea about before. And it's all an effort to shift the blame for this disaster. And the disaster is, of course, the total destruction of the Ukraine nation. And it's all very funny to be watching these despicable pieces of shit pointing at each other in blame, trying to lay the blame on the other. But the fact is, it's all of these people. The Biden administration, the intelligence community, the Pentagon, NATO, Zelensky, the goons around him, they are all equally responsible for the destruction of the Ukraine nation. And they are just, running around trying to pin the blame on the other guy when they all carry that burden of guilt equally. And the thing that is so despicable is that so many lives will have been lost for nothing. The flower of Ukraine, the young men who are the future of any nation, will have been killed for nothing, for the incompetence and greed and hubris and arrogance of a bunch of people far away from those battlefields. I mean, I was laughing at the beginning of this video because it is comical, but at the same time it's enraging to see the destruction of this country for nothing. That's the worst of it. You see, sometimes you have to make great sacrifices and bear great destruction for a great goal. And this is understandable. It's the price to reach difficult goals. But in this case, the Ukrainians, they weren't going to win anything, not the nation, not the people, by going into a war with Russia. They couldn't win against Russia, and this was clear from the outset. And it wasn't merely that the Russians had a bigger army or more weapons or more artillery pieces. No, it was more than that. It was that the Russians recognized from the very beginning that this was a war to the death, and they had to win, and they were going to win at all costs, no matter what. They understood from the very beginning, but the Ukraine leadership, the Zelensky regime, they thought that this was like a TV show. Like they were going to go to war, and they'd all pretend to be Churchill, and they have high old time, and they give speeches at the United Nations, and speeches here, speeches there, and everybody would think that they're so wonderful, and slogans, and all the rest of it. They didn't seem to realize that there would be actual death. And they carried forth this pointless war, this pointless provocation of the Russians that led to this war. And now they're trying to fix the blame on somebody else. As far as I'm concerned, they're all pieces of shit. And if it were up to me, I'd gather up the whole lot of them. The people in Washington, the people in Brussels, the people in Kiev, and I'd put them up in front of a firing squad. And you know who I'd have as the members of the firing squad? The mothers and the wives and the children of all those poor soldiers who died for nothing. They're the ones who should be picking up those rifles and aiming for the heart of these despicable beasts. Back in the 70s and the 80s, there was something called Kremlinology. And the idea was that, you see, the Soviet Union was so closed off that you needed dedicated people who would sort of like analyze every little detail, every little nugget of information that came out of the Soviet Union to understand what was going on inside the Kremlin. Because, you know, the Kremlin at that time was not, you know, posting statements as to what their intentions were or what they were up to or whatnot, right? And so you needed these Kremlinologists. Actually, it was earlier than the 70s, and there was something similar going on insofar as China was concerned, because they were closed societies, because the idea was, of course, that in the United States, in the Western democracies, you know, policy was created openly. Well, maybe it used to be, but not anymore, of course, but that's why I'm kind of like laughing. But see, the idea, like I said, was that policy was made out in the open. It was debated in the halls of Congress, you know, and congressmen would get up and argue with one another. And in a democracy, that's how policy issues were resolved, by open debate, open, free debate. And people voted on stuff and, you know, well, that doesn't happen anymore. Those are the good old days, right? But in the 60s and 70s and 80s, that wasn't happening, of course, in the Soviet Union. It wasn't happening in communist China. Well, it's still communist, but you know what I mean. And so we had these Kremlinologists. Right? I remember it very clearly. It was all kinds of fun, actually, because it was like, you know, what does this mean? Does this line in Pravda mean something important? Or maybe it's nothing. Oh my God, maybe they're planning a nuclear weapon, nuclear war. Ah! You know, it was like that kind of thing. It was like a soap opera. I remember following it a little bit, you know, when I was a teenager. And then, of course, the end of the Soviet Union. And then, of course, you know, no more Kremlinologists, right? Although they're coming back in vogue. But the ones that we have now are really stupid. But for another video. The point I want to make in this video is that now we need criminologists to study what's going on in Washington. We need people to sort of like a team of experts, Washingtonologists or something, call them that. We need Washingtonologists. And these Washingtonologists, what they have to do is sort of like study what's going on to understand what the regime is up to, what's going on internally. Because of course the press that we have, they're garbage. They don't report anything. They just report the superficialities, but they don't report what's actually going on. Not anymore, not for a good long while, right? Why am I bringing this up? Well, because there's this fellow called, oh man, the name's so fine. You guys know how terrible I am with names. It's such a simple name, John R. Allen. It's the simplest name. It's John Smith, practically. John R. Allen is a Marine Corps general, retired, who is the head of the Brookings Institute. Now, I did a little research on this John R. Allen fellow. And, you know, he's pretty much the typical Marine Corps general on the left. He got a couple of advanced degrees at Georgetown, the Naval War College. You know, he commanded the American troops in Afghanistan after Petraeus. And he was peripherally and very, very marginally involved in that whole kerfuffle. I mean, nothing really happened. I mean, he wasn't really involved. It was just like a little bit of shit splattered his way, but it didn't affect his career in any meaningful way. And the thing is that starting in 2013, he became a fellow at the Brookings Institute. Now, this is important. The Brookings Institute, for those of you who don't know, who aren't American, well, it's a think tank. It is a center of policy development. And it is funded by very highfalutin people in American society and American politics. And it's on the left. The director before John Allen, because he is now currently the director of the Brookings Institute, the director before that was Strobe Talbot, a very, very influential guy. He was actually Bill Clinton's teacher. No, he wasn't a teacher, but he worked for Bill Clinton. It's not important. They were all mixed up. They're all part of this morass. They're all part of the Kremlin in Washington, right? So what's going on is that, see, John Allen joined the Brookings as a fellow in 2013. And in 2017, he was named the 7th head of the Brookings Institute. There have only been 6 before him. And this is back in 2017. Now, he's in deep and with very good relationships with the people at the Brookings Institute. Now, why am I mentioning this? Well, because you see, I want to show you that this is not an internal thing at the Brookings, what's happened. And what's happened is that federal prosecutors have taken possession of John Allen's laptop and his emails and whatnot because they're investigating him for influence peddling and taking money that he shouldn't have from Qatar and all kinds of weirdness in that direction, sort of like some sort of like bribery kind of thing, influence peddling kind of thing, right? But this kind of charge, well, you know, like the saying goes, it's like handing out speeding tickets at the Indy 500. You know, everybody's doing it. So why John Allen of all the people? Because all of the Washingtonian critters are doing something like this, of selling access. I mean, that was Hunter Biden's entire business model, man. I mean, selling influence. But, you know, they're focusing on John Allen, John R. Allen, who's in good with the Brookings Institute. Now, what's the big deal with the Brookings Institute? Well, it's neocon central. And one of the very important figures at the Brookings Institute is Robert Kagan, Victoria Nuland's husband. One of the founders of the very influential right-wing group, the New Progress for the American Century, or New Program for the, whatever it was called, you know, the American exceptionalism bullshit, okay, with Bill Kristol, that whole cabal, right? See, the Brookings is the left-wing think tank, but it is pushing this war in Ukraine, something fierce. And the federal prosecutor and the FBI targeted the head of the Brookings Institute. They haven't fired him. I mean, excuse me, they haven't arrested him yet. And the Brookings Institute, in fact, took him out. They removed him, pending investigation, that kind of thing. But, I mean, they didn't remove him voluntarily, They didn't want to. But, this heat, they wanted to remove him. So what's going on? Well, it seems pretty obvious that there is a faction that really wants to shut down this whole Ukraine thing. A faction in Washington that basically this is a shot across the bow of the neocons. Because remember, Robert Kagan, and you say, well, he's just some random think tanker. Who cares about him? Well, he's married to Victoria Nuland. And his brother, Fred, is married to Kimberly Kagan, who runs the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War, which is a prime mover insofar as bullshit Ukraine propaganda. And Fred Kagan, well, he's, into all this shit too. He teaches at West Point and is teaching this bullshit about Ukraine and proxy wars and regime change. I mean, this whole thing is a family business. I've done videos on my other channels about this, right? And so the fact that John Allen, got taken out at the kneecaps by the FBI and this federal prosecutor, it indicates that there is some other very powerful force in Washington that does not want any more of this Ukraine shit. And the issue is, who is it? Is it the Obama faction? Because it could be them. Because it's not the Clintonista faction. No, of course not. Because Hillary Clinton and all her faction and all the people attached to Hillary. Well, see, Fred Kagan and John Allen and Robert Kagan and Victoria Nuland, they're all part of that cabal. So it's not the Clintonistas who are doing this. Now, could it be the progressives? I doubt it. Because they wouldn't have the sophistication. I mean, well, they would have the sophistication, perhaps some of the smarter people there, but they wouldn't perhaps have the muscle to make it happen. And even if they were able to take out John Allen, well, what would be the point of that for them, from their point of view? Mm-hmm. And so it's not the progressives, and it's certainly not the Biden family, headed by Jill Biden. She doesn't really give a shit. All she cares about is continuing the Biden family grift without anyone in the Biden family being indicted. And John Allen, that his electronic data got seized by the FBI, the American authorities, this does not affect the Biden family at all. I mean, zero. So I'm figuring to be one of these Washingtonologists. I'm figuring that it's the Obama faction shooting, firing around across the bow of the neocons and telling them, enough with this Ukraine shit. We're not going to push it anymore. It's over. I mean, you see my thinking here. Because the Clintonistas, the John McCain faction, when John McCain is no longer alive, but his ghost lingers on, as they say. Hillary Clinton, the Clintonista faction, the McCain faction, the neocon Israel First faction, all these people, the Brookings Institute is their clubhouse. And John Allen was in good standing in this clubhouse. He hadn't, he's not the kind of guy who makes waves. I mean, no guy who makes general ever made waves. Okay? You got to understand that. Both of my grandfathers were naval officers, and I have a bunch of family members who were in the military. No, they were not part of the Pinochet dictatorship, although many of them were the bosses of some of the people who were in the Pinochet junta, but that's for another video. But anyway, I know enough about how it is that people who rise to admiral or general, they're very politically careful. And so John Allen would never have done anything, he'd never have colored outside the lines. And he certainly would not have antagonized his own people, his own clubhouse, for them to remove him. The fact that they removed him is really just damage control. It's not, personal, it's business, right? It's that they figure, well, we'll just take him out of the picture for the time being, just until we figure out what's what. Maybe he's the sacrificial lamb, for these neocons. But clearly, It seems to me it's the Obama faction telling the Clintonista, warmongering, McCain, Israel first, neocon faction, enough with Ukraine.